Hey everyone, welcome to another interview. I am joined today by Nathanael Welch, who is coming to us live from LA. Nathanael, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm very
I
excited to have you. Go ahead.
yeah. I wish I was out there in Australia with you, but
Yeah,
alas,
beautiful.
I'm in sunny LA instead.
It's actually, yeah, 'cause it's a pretty miserable, overcast day here, so you don't really even, I can't even brag about Australian summer. Probably worse off than you guys. Although I think the next couple of days are going to get, 30 plus and hot.
Oh wow,
Yeah, so
crazy.
it's going to be nice for the weekend. So Nathaniel is pursuing a master's in theological studies through the Hatchery in LA while working to develop a new model of church specifically for persons with disabilities. You can find more about his work at nathanaelwelch.com and more about the community at differentunited.com. So both websites you should check out. So Nathaniel, I thought we should do like a little get to know you kind of exercise just first. And I realized you and I have a little bit in common.
Oh great.
Yeah, because I realized, so at first we both have brothers with disabilities and with autism as part of that.
hmm
Uh, both of us had an arts background. I think you did music performance. Is that right?
I did. Yeah, music performance and then music theory.
There you go. And I did a BFA in acting. So we
Oh
both had
wow.
that. And then we both switched to theological study
hmm
as
hmm
we got on. And we're both very handsome. So, of
Absolutely. Got
course.
great beards.
Yeah. I'm a little beard envious, actually. But that's okay. I can handle that. So I just thought I'd see just how far it extends. I'll just do a couple of either/or questions, and we'll see how long
Oh,
it's
perfect.
up for until it falls apart.
Sounds good.
Great. So summer or winter?
Winter.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
There. Because you can always put more clothes on.
That's
Yeah.
the exact argument I would use.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Beer or wine?
Whiskey?
Okay. Going to third. I don't
Yeah.
go with you quite to whiskey, but we'll keep
I like
going.
I like sour beers.
Okay. There you
Yeah.
go.
Or like really dark barrel aged stouts and stuff like that.
Yeah. All right. Cool. This is important stuff to know. As we go forward. Do you read a book or do you wait for the movie?
Read a book.
Okay. Yeah, we part ways there. I think
Mm,
if I know the movie's coming out, I'll watch the movie first and then return to the
I
book.
see. Yeah.
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 Staying in or going out?
Probably staying in.
Yeah, I'm with you. Going out's for suckers.
That's right.
Um, and finally, tomato or tomato?
Let's just call the whole thing off, I think.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, now we've got that out of the way.
That was fun.
Yeah, thanks. We're acclimated. So talk to me first about Different United and what led you to forming this community. And then partly within that, maybe what's this, the art walk photo project that I'm hearing about and how others can get involved in that.
Yeah, so Different United is my project at the Hatchery out here. So the Hatchery is a little bit different school. It's kind of like a seminary combined with a business school. So we learn social entrepreneurial things as a way to put into practice our theological education. So instead of trying to get a job at a church or something like that, coming out of seminary, which is increasingly more and more difficult. The idea is to take the skills from like a business sort of degree and create a new, different type of community. So that's sort of what Different United is for me, and it's a community for people with and without disabilities, but first and foremost for people with disabilities. Having like you said, I've got a brother who's severely disabled, so growing up with him, taking care of him for several years, one-on-one, and just seeing the lack of resources that the government provide, that the community provides, that the church provides. You start to get to a point where you want people to solve things for you, right? The government should do stuff, and I absolutely agree with that completely. And I do think that we do need to do everything we can to help. However, I got to a point where I realized I'm not doing anything and I should do something. I can do something. I should do something. And I'm not going to wait for anyone else to solve this problem. I'm going to take matters into my own hands. So Different United is my attempt to connect people digitally at first, with the intention of somehow hopefully creating little pockets, in actual physical spaces. But initially, digitally connecting people like myself, like you, who have family members perhaps with disabilities, because there's not really a place for us to go and connect and to share our stories, our experiences, our frustrations, our successes, and that sort of thing. So that's sort of the genesis of that. Now, out of that came the Art Walk idea, which is, it's a creative endeavor with the goal of not just raising awareness for the problems that people with disabilities face, but for actually making people with disabilities visible in the community. I think before you can speak to and address the issues that people with disabilities face, or any group, any marginalized group, you first need to be aware that the problems exist. And I think we have gotten really good as a society, as a church, at pushing aside people who are different, people who don't belong, people who think, act, speak, do things differently than us, so that you go into most normal churches, most churches that I've gone to, at least, on any given day, and you don't see anybody there with a disability. And it's more than just about being seen. It's about being welcomed and belonging as well. So the Art Walk is my attempt to make visible those whom we've made invisible, so that when you take these people with disabilities and they take pictures and they capture the world as they see it, and then you print them out, mat them, put them in frames, have a gallery, and the community come and look at the gallery. They're not just seeing what they've created, but they're seeing the creator there too. So you're humanizing these people that we've dehumanized. And so it's sort of my way of, in a non-confrontational, non-threatening way, trying to get the non-disabled community to recognize that these people are here, they exist, and that they are people just like you. So that's sort of the gist of the Art Walk and how it connects with Different United.
Great, thank you for that. And there's a lot of stuff online that people want to check it out and work out how to do their own. There's lots of resources being made available by Nathanael, so that's really great. I'm curious, and you kind of did touch on it a little bit here in that response, that how your desire to establish this community emerged out of your experience of a lack of intention and effort on the part of churches, this everyday run-of-the-mill suburban churches. So especially when it comes to cultivating a sense of belonging for people with disabilities and their carers or families. Is that the case? And if so, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen or experienced from churches?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Brian Swinton has this great line. He distinguishes between welcoming and belonging. So that being welcomed into a community is not the same thing as belonging to a community. And the way that he describes the difference is, if you were not there, would you be missed? Mm-hmm. And if you're missed, then you belong there. If not, then you're just there. And I mean, obviously there are steps to this. There are gradations. You can't just go immediately from having no presence in a community to suddenly being, integral part of the community. I'm aware that there are steps that need to be taken. However, I don't think that, in my experience, at least, and other people may have different experiences, but and most of the people I've talked to, this seems to be the case, that the church has not done enough to make people with disabilities feel human, to feel like they are welcomed in the church or any other space. So a couple, you asked for some concrete examples of ways that I think they've made those mistakes. One is naturally the physical structures, the way that the space is structured physically. Now, I realize I used to work at an old Episcopal church in the Midwest, and it's this old castle-looking building. I mean, they're not going to change the way that the building is structured. I know that, but the way that the space feels inside is not very welcoming. So that anytime a noise is made that is not anticipated, like everyone immediately turns and looks like, "What was that?" And then you feel like, "Oh, I've done something wrong. And then the next thing that happened is, oh, do you mind if you go outside, step outside from them until they calm down? And well, yeah, I get that. I understand that. But sometimes people with disabilities, my brother included, that's how they communicate. And so we're really telling them it's not okay for you to be who you are. I mean, that's a big ask, and I understand that it's going to take a lot of effort to get to a place where something like that is acceptable. But I also think that the emphasis on the preaching and the sermon, the spoken word, that's I mean, it goes way back to Protestant, the Protestant Reformation, and I mean that's the legacy we live in, is that is the center of the service. But my brother doesn't understand any of that. He doesn't know what that means. So how do you make him feel like he's a part of the community if he can't understand the most integral part of the service? I think that there are lots of ways we can do that. I think that we have underutilized physical touch, for instance, embracing people, holding hands, those sorts of, safe and warm gestures. I mean, that's how, with my brother and I, that's how we respond to each other the most, is through physical touch. Obviously, you get in some touchy areas there, pun intended, with that. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say, which is that we have focused so much on certain senses, certain aspects of the service, and we have worked really hard at refining those and getting really good at that. But what we haven't realized is that excludes a large group of people. And I think by reimagining or rethinking how we approach that will not only make people we've excluded welcome, but it will change the way we experience it too. I mean, like it's not just for them, it's for us too. But I think by taking some of those small steps, small in one sense, big in another, I think we can help to try to correct some of the mistakes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it. Exactly. How are you thinking about engaging and helping people journey along with you and feel exactly welcomed and that you want their presence to be there, even if their presence is maybe disruptive to how you would normally go about things.
Exactly.
Yeah, really important. So you've gone the route of starting a new kind of community, which is great, and others may want to go that way too. But what are ways that maybe an individual within an existing church, say at the the church in the Midwest where you were or wherever they might be, how can they take some first steps to creating a community that is promoting belonging for people with disabilities and their families?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, and I'm just going to speak from my own like the steps that I've taken. Hopefully that will help. But the first thing is, and this is sort of large scale here, is believing that you can do something. And that may seem simple and silly and trite, but I think that we are the inheritors of a certain tradition which says that we don't really have the kind of agency in the world that we like to think that we do. This is all sort of out of our control, right? Like the universe operates the way the universe operates, and there's not really much we can do about it. Things are sort of explained away, so that my ability to act as a subject in the world and change the things in the world is diminished or eradicated almost completely. So, and this is something I struggle with a lot. So I think it's really, really, really crucial to understand your place in the world as an agent, as a subject, among other subjects, and that we affect one another and can be affected by one another. That I think is a crucial first step. If you don't believe that to be true, then why bother? And that's something I struggle with, because I want to do stuff and then I get like, oh, what's the point? None of it's going to matter. I'm not going to really be able to change anything, make any difference. So it's an ongoing struggle for sure, but one that I think is worth taking. The other thing I would say is that just like the game that we played at the beginning, there are a lot of people out there who have similar experiences that we just don't even know about. And the more I do this, the more I'm finding people who say, oh, my brother has that, or, I've got a friend who, or, my sister, blah, blah, blah. and I would have never known that had we not had these kind of conversations, so I think that underutilized resources around you is a something to keep in mind, that there are a wealth of people and experiences at your disposal if you just ask, if you say something, if you make that effort, that just otherwise get lost. So I think that those are two important things if you want to start something on your own. First, believing that you can do that, and two, asking the people who are already around you, because I think you'd be surprised at what you find.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's really cool. I've seen examples of that, and even just, I think we can get into a habit sometimes as people in the church, whether you're someone who puts together a roster or puts together a team, that you gravitate towards asking the people most like you, because you can anticipate their response and how they'll approach it. And that obviously goes to race and gender and
oh yeah, totally.
Too. But particularly disabilities, and yet often you will find people be willing to do stuff. My brother goes up on a Friday afternoon to the local church, and he folds their bulletin. And no one in my family has gone to that church in about a decade. We've all moved and gone to other churches for stuff like that, but he still goes to he doesn't go to that church, but he just still rolls in on a Friday.
That's
for the
awesome.
30 minutes it takes to fold the 100 bulletins or whatever, and then he just leaves. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and he loves that, and loves getting involved with a few other bits and pieces. And but yeah, you're right. It's someone taking go, hey, would you like to do this? And maybe it's okay, what could suit the person, or what might suit their interests and abilities, but and that might take a little thought. But yeah, you're right. It goes to that you have the ability to ask someone, they have the possibly the ability to respond and get involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you did a post recently listing some books on disability theology, which is probably something that a lot of people, even with family members with disabilities, have never probably heard, that there's a whole stream of theology where people are considering this, or people are writing as people with disabilities. For someone looking to get involved in this topic or learn a little more, what are some places or some resources or some books that you would recommend?
Yeah, I was one of those people. I mean, when I first started, when I changed gears into theology and came out here and started studying, I had no idea that was a field. So I feel like I'm still on the front end of this whole world of theology and disability. But if you are the reading type, if that's the way that you like to get your information, then a couple of books or authors I would recommend. The first I think book that anyone should read if they're interested in this, or even if they're not interested in this, is called "The Disabled God" by Nancy Easlan. It's sort of the first work that sort of sparked interest broadly in this kind of movement. Now she had a disability herself, and it's a short book, and she wrote about her experience as being physically disabled. The title of the book, "Disabled God," is about this symbolic image she had of Christ as disabled, and sort of trying to make sense of what that image would mean for our faith. It's a powerful book, short, easy to read. You don't have to be well trained theologically to read it. So I think that everyone should start there. Some other people, I think Amos Young is a great resource. Yong. He's out here in California at Fuller, and I've met with him several times and talked with him, and he's a great guy. He's a Pentecostal theologian, which is a little odd. I didn't even know there was such a thing, but there is. And he's a great guy, and I've read several of his books. He's got a book on theology and Down syndrome. That one's a little nerdy. He's got a bunch of other books too. We read his systematic theology, actually. But anyway, because he's Pentecostal, he's looking at this from a pneumatological perspective. What does the Spirit? What can the experience of the Spirit tell us about our faith, about what it means to be human, and including disability? His brother has Down syndrome, which is his interest in that. So I think that those are good places to start. Also, I mentioned earlier Brian Swinton Swinton. He's a great resource. I think he must have. I think he did something. Like, he was a nurse, I think, is what it was. And he's written extensively, so that's really accessible stuff too to read. There are a bunch of podcasts out there too, if that's more your thing. I know that I can't think of anything in particular to point someone to, but if you just search for it, or if you send me a message, I can send you some good episodes. But I know that there's some guys in Sweden who have a podcast. And they've done a couple episodes on disability and theology, and the BBC has done a couple, different podcasts and things like that. So there's a lot of information out there. It's hard to find good stuff, but if you're willing to dig, it's out there. And I've got a whole bookshelf full of books that I want to read this semester. Oh, the other person I would mention is Jean Vanier, who's the founder of L'Arche. So he's written extensively. He's I think he's in his mid-90s now. French theologian, pastor, and he's written a ton of books. Very, very easy to read. Very powerful. He was friends with Henry Nouwen, and so their friendship, really mutually affected each other and their theology. So that's another great resource I would suggest.
Great, thank you for that. And people can check out the post you did for 4 others. So that's awesome as well.
Yep.
So I feel that some of these shortcomings that we've been mentioning in the church trace, at least in some way, back to theological shortcomings or theological oversight that perhaps reflects broader societal issues. It's hard not to think that certain conceptions of salvation based on intellectual assent mean that Christians might not focus as much on people who cannot offer a verbal or intellectual assent to an idea, or that views on sanctification and Christian living that focus on engaging in certain practices or living out in a certain way would then run into a clash when people can't live or engage in practices. So what are your thoughts on that link, and what have you performed or come across that seeks to correct those shortcomings?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you don't even realize is there, because it's sort of the backdrop, background to the way that we engage in the world. So it's just unquestioned for most of the time. A couple things that I would say, so a couple of the things that I've already mentioned. Amos Young's book, Theology and Down Syndrome, he traces the history of theology from the Enlightenment, the Reformation forward, and how it parallels the treatment of people with disabilities, specifically people with intellectual disabilities. And it's fascinating because, in a sense, we wouldn't have the types of disabilities that we have today if it weren't for modern science and medicine. The ability to prolong life and to treat certain illnesses or symptoms has really created a situation where now we have people living to much longer ages and in conditions that they weren't otherwise able to survive in before. I actually did a paper on this last semester. I have a YouTube video about it too, where I sort of traced the history from ancient Greece to today of what are some ways that we have understood as humans people with disabilities. You sort of hear those anachronistic explanations of being possessed in the Bible. I call that was probably someone with epilepsy. Whether it was or wasn't, no one's really able to know. But the point is that the way that they have been treated has remained pretty constant. And I think that it's, like you said, it's intimately connected to how we view the world, how we view humanity. And so that's my personal take on it. The way that you understand what it means to be human shapes everything else that you do theologically, everything else that you do scientifically, everything else that you do psychologically, biologically. All those things start with, what does it mean to be a human? How do we understand our humanity? And for thousands of years, it's been the capacity for reason, or the capacity for language, or the ability to reflect consciously, self-consciously. And I'm not denying that those are aspects. I'm just saying that that's not it. Like, there's more to it than that, because from an early age, I had always had a problem with those sorts of explanations. I didn't really have the language to use for it, or I didn't really have another alternative. I just knew that the experience I had with my brother was profound and meaningful, and it was completely missing from the dominant narrative in my society at the time. Like, there was no way to talk about that sort of relationship from the position of most scientists and most anthropologists and theologians. Even, he's not even really a human. You read back some of the statements that people like Luther have said, or Augustine, or Aristotle, or Calvin, all these people. Like, it's terrible. Like, no, they're not really humans. Like, it's probably the devil that's taken them over, or something like that. Or we should just suffocate them or drown them because they're not really human and they're worthless. Like, it's shocking. But when you stop and think about the reasons why I'm trying to do things like Different United in the Art Walk, like, it's not really surprising, because we've inherited that, and it's just part of the way we look at the world. So not just with people with disabilities, but all people. The way that we understand people is, I think, hugely problematic in a lot of ways. Going back to the first thing I said about believing that you can do something in the world. So I've been recently reading some process theology, and I was reading some Martin Buber, I Am Thou, and some Levinas and Heschel and stuff. And I think that a more robust theology that takes seriously the relationality that is fundamental to our existence can help to correct maybe some of this substance-based anthropology that we just use without even realizing it. So that what makes us human isn't that I can think, or that I can speak, or that I can reflect on myself, consciously, is that I am in relation to other humans. Like, that's what makes us human, is that we're humans together. We can't be humans apart from other humans. It's a necessity for us to be human that there are other humans. And then I would go a step further and say that not just that we are humans relating to other humans, but that God is first relating to us. So that relationality, the relationship, I think, is primary, it's central, and I think that it's when you shift how you understand that, a lot of things open up theologically. A lot of things open up, interpersonally, that otherwise would have been, removed from your view.
No, I appreciate that a lot. And I think that it has a lot of great implications, that relational approach. Like, not only, around this area about how we treat disabled people, how so often it's about removing from the broader community and things like that. But then, it just came to mind today because there's been a lot of talk over in the US about torture as a legitimate approach. And so much of that is about removing a person from relationships, or prison that rely on solitary confinement. Removing it's a, understood this way, it's a base denial of someone's humanity, or trying to separate them from their humanity. So I think that's a great understanding that takes things further, in a lot of ways. And even we had an interview which is coming out soon about animal liberation and things like that, and eco-theology. And so often we kind of double down on these rational, or these kind of human capacity definitions of human, if we're too worried about, we need to create some separation because I can't be too similar to a evolutionary kind of thing. And it just doubles down, like, but wait, now you're just a huge swath of humanity that is being left out of your definition. So
exactly, I mean, for my project last semester, I was writing a lot about the eugenics movement in the U.S. in the late 19th and early 20th century. There were a ton of, most people don't know this, but there were a ton of laws passed by the states that allowed for forced sterilization of people with disabilities. The reason being because, I'll try to do this as succinctly as possible, So we cannot educate people with disabilities. We thought we could. There was a period, this is when special education starts to thrive and come into its own. We believed that we could teach people with intellectual disabilities to learn and to behave morally and ethically as citizens of the state and as members of the church. And then we come to a period where we realize that's not really possible. There are some people, my brother included, who just cannot be taught beyond a certain level. And so what do you do with people who cannot behave morally, ethically, according to the norms that society has set? They're not good citizens, they're not good consumers, they're not good churchgoers, whatever. Well, because of the way that we view human capacity, like you just said, well, we need to stop them from reproducing, right? Like if we just stop them from making more, then we can eventually rid society of this menace. And that's exactly how they thought. And that's exactly the legacy we live in today. There were 37 states out of the 48 at the time. There weren't 50 yet during this period. 37 out of the 48 states had ratified laws that made it legal to, forcibly sterilize. The Germans picked this up, and that's what started their eugenic program in Nazi Germany. The first people that they gassed were people with disabilities. So and we still, the medical fields that we rely on today in a lot of ways still treat people with disabilities this way, as if there is this problem within them that we can just maybe pluck out, or we need to just fix somehow, or if not, then the whole thing is just gone to waste. Like well, we can't save it. Like you're doomed, and it's heartbreaking. It's especially if you've got a family member like this, or you yourself have a disability. I mean, to be treated instrumentally like this is disgusting. There's really no other word for it. So. And I think, and a lot of other people think too, not just me, that this is directly connected to that, substance-based, capacity-based understanding of what it means to be human.
I think that's a great point. The way that legacy kind of holds through is we're seeing now with, again, the advancement of technology and being able to pick up things like Down syndrome in utero.
Yeah.
And so like my wife and I, she's pregnant, we're having a baby in April, and they were offering us, thank you. They were offering us these tests where you can find out. And I was, I'm thinking of my brother, I'm like, he's autism different to Down syndrome, but still the idea of finding out for what purpose, it has a direct idea of humanity that I think, well, his life is easier to get rid of, or, that Down syndrome life would be easier to get rid of than a non-Down syndrome life. It's very problematic.
And actually that test was developed by a man and woman, a husband and wife team who had a child with Down syndrome for that very reason. Their son had Down syndrome, and she didn't know, while she was pregnant. They developed this test, which is a useful test for a lot of other reasons, not just for that purpose. But the primary driver for it was because her son had Down syndrome, and she wanted to make it so that other women would know and abort the fetus if that was the case. So
so we are trying to untangle a long history of poor and misunderstood treatment.
Definitely.
So just a final question here, and quite broadly speaking, as someone who's both grown up with and now works with people with disabilities, what are some of the most common mistakes that just an individual might make when engaging with a person with disability? Now, I understand, again, not a homogenous group, but just, maybe some things that you've picked up on, or, I know just because you have a sibling with disability doesn't mean you're at least I'm speaking of myself, all of a sudden an expert when you meet other people with disabilities. I make every mistake that anyone else have criticized making with my brother, just because, again, I'm familiar with my brother, and unfamiliarity scares us.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think you hit it spot on there. A lot of the people I've been meeting and in the theology and disability world out here, I'm constantly reminded of how ignorant I am. Like, oh, well, just because I grew up taking care of my brother doesn't mean I really know anything, So that's definitely true. A couple things. I think that we need to understand that people with disabilities have a name, and we need to treat them as just a normal person with a name. This is something that I am guilty of, and I'm trying to work on. Is whenever I'm writing a story or an article about someone with a disability, it's very easy for me to just talk about them, not talk about their name, not mention their the specificity of who they are, but just to speak sort of broadly as if they were representative of this huge group. But it is an immensely diverse group, so that just because someone over here has this experience doesn't mean that someone over there is going to have that experience. And we get into this trouble with language too. So a lot of people are very particular about the language that they use and the terms that they use. And now, me personally, I don't take much offense if someone says something in a way that I wouldn't have put it. Somebody would say, "Oh, is your brother mentally retarded?" He is, and that's an older way of saying it. We don't really say that anymore. So I try to be very patient with people when they make those mistakes and correct it. But keep in mind that not everybody likes to be spoken of the same. I know that for the deaf community, for instance, they don't prefer person first language. They prefer they are deaf people. They're not people who are deaf. And so there's a difference. But individual people within that group might it's all very particular and very different. So don't feel like you have to get it right, but be willing to be corrected. So I think that that's a really important thing when speaking to people with disabilities. I've also had the experience numerous times. This has happened so many times, I can't even count. People have come up to me and my brother and said, "Oh, can I pray for you? Oh, can I pray for him? Can I?" Oh, and I let him do it. Like, it's fine, because it's clearly more for them than it is for me or my brother. This is important for them to do. It doesn't really matter to me at all. But it can come across very patronizing, and it's very problematic given the metaphysics you hold to be true. But I think that it's okay to come up and talk and interact and speak. I think that's totally fine, and I think that needs to happen more. And I think more people are afraid to even cross that barrier, to even just come up and say anything. So that's why, on the one hand, it's like, well, you don't need to come up and say, "Can I pray for you?" You can just come up and talk to us. But at least they're coming up to us. You know what I mean? At least they're taking that leap. And I think that people with disabilities, more than anything else, just want to be normal, want to be treated as normal people, because they are. And oh, well, how do we talk about them? Or do we, what's the right way to come up and say, "Oh, how do I interact?" How do you do it for anyone else? It's the same thing. So that's sort of my advice, is that there really isn't a way to do it, and you're going to make mistakes and screw up. I mean, I make mistakes and screw up all the time with everyone, including people with disabilities. So I think being willing to learn, being willing to take that risk goes a huge way. Otherwise, we're just going to get into a situation where we continue to ignore them, or marginalize them and exclude them because we're just too afraid to say something and make a mistake. Get over ourselves. That's kind of my position.
100%. Yeah, I think going up on this, how was your weekend? Is pretty much how we start every conversation, or what are you doing this weekend if it's after Wednesday? Start from there and then adjust as you, depending on the response you get and the interest you're shown. But you're right. I think, being willing to risk, it didn't go as I hoped the plan is something we can do more of. So,
totally.
Well, Nathanael, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated your insights and gaining from your experience here. How can people connect with you, with your work? We've mentioned Different United, but other things you might want to shout out.
Yeah, Different United is the website for the community and the Art Walk project. So definitely head over there to find out more about that. I have it also links to my personal blog, which is a little bit nerdier, theologically based writing. That's nathanaelwelch.com. That's NATHANAELWELCH, spelled a little different. Yeah. But you can also find me all over the internet. Nathan Loves Trees is my handle. So you find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and all that good stuff. So it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for reaching out.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Glad we could do it. All right, everyone. We'll see you around. Make sure you check out Jesus1224.com for our big project that's coming up. But Nathaniel, thank you very much for being part of this today.
Hey, no problem. Thank you.
All right.